I'm the head of, man, she back up and
No, right there.
so enthusiastic to talk to you today. I'm Ron Barnes. I'm the head of state legislative.
Thank you for talking to us today.
For Google, I will take 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Thank you. Talk to you succinctly. I'm here to support several amendments that I believe are before you on the underlying bill, L 17, 18, and 19. I represent Google, but we've been working with a large coalition of education service providers, a number of brand name companies that you would recognize, an association that has of its members a lot of educational, online educational providers. We look at this issue and take this issue of student data privacy very seriously. We know this is a concern for parents, we know this is a concern for educators, and we know this is a concern for policymakers. We think the amendments that are before you balance the promise and benefits of technology and provide strong student privacy protections. Importantly, though, they also provide consistency for those of us in this business across the country, such that states don't have individual requirements which would prohibit or which would interfere with the provision of services that are provided on a national platform or on a national basis. This issue is being taken up in about half the states, specifically in about half the states around the country this year, and we are working with all of them to achieve this consistency so that as policymakers look at this, the appropriate privacy protections are put in place, but the service providers are able to provide this service. Importantly, as Representative Pabon said in the excellent summary he gave at the beginning, this provides, I think your term is sort of swim lanes or guidance for everybody here to know what to expect from vendors, for vendors to know what the permissive uses are, what the impermissive uses are, and to act then within those confines. So this bill, we think, works on for the policymakers to achieve that level of satisfaction that you're protecting the student data, that educators will have the ability to use the promise of technology in classrooms, and that vendors will know what it is they are allowed to do and not to do in this context. So with that, I will see back my 26 seconds and anticipate a question.
Representative Garnett. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for your testimony. Can you be a little bit more specific about what it is in the underlying bill that, in your opinion, doesn't really meet the goal of what we're all sort of discussing today, and maybe not speaking to the amendment, because we're not in the amendment phase, how, what other ideas are out there to solve some of the issues you think aren't addressed or go too far here in the underlying bill?
Mr. Barnes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Garnett, I would certainly risk overstating my welcome if I went into too much detail on that. The challenge with the bill as drafted versus what we would like to see in the amendments is chiefly the clarity and consistency. So the clarity in defining the terms that need to be defined in order to have the consistency across the country such that a provision of a service in Colorado isn't governed by a particular interpretation of a term, like one of the ones is, for example, amassing a profile. What does that mean? If interpreted broadly, it could mean essentially everything a student does in the educational context could be considered a profile for them. And a prohibition on amassing a profile would mean essentially a prohibition on not allowing an educational service, an online educational service in the school. So what we're trying to do is sort of iron out some of the peaks and valleys in the language. I believe it was Representative Rowan who talked about the need for specificity in what the words say and what they mean. That's the...
Mr. Chair. Representative Brennan, I'm sorry. I think this is just sort of a more comment to the committee, I think what's before us today is not whether or not we're creating a consistent playing field so nationwide vendors have a more smooth transition from state to state. What's really before us today is protecting the privacy of our kids and making sure that our parents have access to the information that's being collected on them. So as much as I understand patchwork frameworks, as much as I understand that these are issues that states across the country are trying to deal with, the questions that are before the committee today shouldn't be making sure that huge multi-conglomerate corporations have a more easily interpretable regulatory framework to operate under. We just got to make sure that we're doing this on behalf of our kids and on behalf of our parents. And that's the way that I'm reading this bill. That's the way that I'm looking at this bill. And I get it. I understand it. The more I go through this stuff, if we can get there too, that's great. But for the members of this committee, that's not, in my opinion, what we're doing here today.
Look, man,
Yeah.
Representative, I agree with you. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, though. I think that in providing those protections, you and doing it in a way that allows a service that is done off of a national platform to be offered in both Colorado and Kansas, in Maine and in Arizona, I don't think that you in any way would lessen those protections. I think it can be done, and I think you meet those goals. We're certainly not at loggerheads with you on the privacy protection.
Additional questions for this witness? Representative Lundin.
So I'm a capitalist. I believe in making profit where I can make profit legally, morally, ethically. And the bill's very explicit. The section does not prohibit an operator of an internet website, online service, online application, mobile application from marketing educational products directly to parents so long as the marketing did not result from the use of covered information obtained by the operator through provision of services in the bill. So the question is, as I was talking with the education person earlier, if in the collaborative education environment, you create, let's just say with Google Docs, since that's whom you represent, there are other platforms that do similar things, and there are other opportunities where the same crossover might exist, but I'll just try and make it Google specific. Collaborative documents created in the education environment. Student chooses then to move it to their own personal Google Drive. It would seem illogical for you, Google, not to pursue the ongoing marketing and remarketing that I live with every day as an adult, and I'm aware as part of my choice. Quite frankly, I'm taking notes in my Google Docs right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm comfortable with that. I'm accepting of the marketing and remarketing that happens. How would you create a carve-out? Why would you create a carve-out? Why would that choice to move things, and as things leak from the protected environment into the non-protected environment, how can a parent feel safe or a student and not get themselves into difficulty under the desire of what this bill is trying to get at?
Well, let me, to the question that you addressed, Barnes. Go ahead. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. My enthusiasm gets the better of me in the conversation. Representative, the question that you addressed to Mr. Moore, and in the school context, and let me talk specifically about Google Apps for Education, in which I'm well versed. There are a number of other services I know out there that I am not as well versed on. The student login creates a bounded universe for the use of that data by the student and by Google. There is no marketing and there is no advertising that takes place in the school context when logged in Google Apps for Education users in the Google Apps suite. Now, for example, as a student searches, again, as a logged in student, they don't see an ad. I have heard concerns about a document, for example, say in Google Docs, if you write a book report on the Andes Mountains, a concern that perhaps later on you'll see an advertisement for Andes after dinner minutes. We, on the consumer side, we don't even say to your drive. That doesn't happen for you in that regard. That doesn't happen for the students in that regard. The issue of